News is brought to you weekly out of the SPNN studios in St. Paul. Now this evening we're going to touch on a number of different issues. Some of these we've talked about in the past, but we want to look at them in a little bit more detail. Many of these issues not only affect Maplewood, Minnesota, but they also affect other communities that have public access television or who have governmental entities like their municipal government that relies on franchise fees from public access TV and franchise fees from the cable companies. But before we get into that, in a previous newscast, we covered the complaint where the Myth Live 2 had sued the city of Maplewood. Well, the city of Maplewood has now filed their answer to that complaint. And no surprises, their answer basically is deny, deny, deny. And would we expect anything other than that? Now, for those of you that may have missed our first newscast on this about a month ago, with regard to this lawsuit against the city of Maplewood, I have with me this evening the complaint. And I think the complaint sets out very well what the concerns are of the Myth with regard to the actions taken against them or attempted to take against them by the city of Maplewood. Previously, we had film footage on the city council meeting where the city council and the upper administrative staff of City Hall were trying to put the thumb on the Myth Entertainment Center. Now, if you haven't been to Maplewood or you're not familiar with the Myth, let me give you a little background. The Myth is an entertainment center that is up near the Maplewood Mall. So that's up by 694 in the intersection with White Bear Avenue. When I was mayor of Maplewood, that's when the Myth went into its current location. Previous to that, it was a big box store building that had been vacant for many years. It was actually a shoe store, quite a large shoe store, sort of like an outlet store for shoes that just really never took off. And so the building sat vacant for a number of years, and then it was looked at by individuals who wanted to open an entertainment venue where bands could come in to an area where there was enough parking and it was close to transportation corridors so that people from around the neighboring region could come to the entertainment. It wasn't a bar. Like you would think of a bar that's open, 6 or 7 days a week, and that sometimes they have bands and sometimes they don't. This is actually the type of center where they have bands there 50 to 70 evenings of the year. And of course, they do have a liquor license. Some of their entertainment is specifically geared for those who are under drinking age, and so they have certain nights for that or events for that. But for the most part, most of the concerts are for adults and they're for drinking adults. And that's part of what the business model is as well, because people can go there and have a beverage an alcoholic beverage at the same time that they're enjoying the concert. Well, in this case of when the Myth first went into Maplewood, one of the big issues that was part of establishing their business was to determine if they had enough parking for their facilities. And if they looked at only their parking lot alone, which went with the building, there wasn't sufficient parking to accommodate the capacity of the building for a concert. And so it was agreed by the city council at that time that if they had in place written agreements with some of the other neighboring retail entities around there, say for instance Ashley Furniture Store, that then they could move forward with their entertainment venue because they had these shared parking agreements, because most of the time when they were having concerts would be the time when, say for instance, Ashley Furniture really didn't have a big demand for their parking lot, so people could park there and simply walk across the street to go to the Myth. So that was how they solved that issue having to do with the parking and having sufficient parking. Well, as time went on, there were times where the ownership at the time was having some financial problems, and that's when we were having our depression and things weren't going so well. But then they too, like many of the other businesses around there and throughout the metro, started to recover because the economy recovered and people had more discretionary income because now they had employment and were more able to go to concerts and to entertainment. So the Myth has been going strong with their entertainment in Maplewood. Well, as it turns out, this current council that we have in Maplewood, they have this idea in their mind that for some reason they want to put the screws on the Myth. And they cite to one particular incident that happened earlier in the year, where there was an allegation that there was a shooting at the Myth. As it turned out, it actually wasn't even on the Myth property, and it wasn't even actually confirmed that the people involved in the shooting were even connected with going to a concert at the Myth at all. And that, of course, was not part of any of the council discussion. The council only wanted to focus on the fact that a shooting occurred in the vicinity of the Myth. Now, let's not ignore the fact that before that and after that, there have been other shootings in Maplewood and at other establishments where there might be alcohol or where there might not be alcohol. And Maplewood has not chosen to take any actions against those particular businesses because a shooting has occurred near their business or in their business. So you see, it is sort of selective in what they were choosing to do. And they were going so far, this city council was going so far as to try to attempt to tell the Myth that in order to serve alcohol and have their liquor license, that they had to limit each patron to the Myth to only 2 drinks. Well, now, I ask you, how practical is that to put that type of restriction on a business to monitor how many drinks each and every one of their patrons is having that night? Well, of course, the city did back down finally on that one because it's totally impractical. How are you supposed to even manage something like that? Finally, then the city came up with the idea that, well, then they should have only a certain amount of alcohol in each of the drinks, and that they should have basically watered down drinks. Well, now, again, that is certainly micromanaging the business of this entertainment group. So in this complaint, as I indicated, for those of you who may not have seen our previous report on this, you may find this complaint to be very interesting in that the Myth does state that they enjoy a positive reputation in the community, and particularly among other local businesses that benefit from its operation. They had submitted to the city council when they were brought before the city council. They brought before them the letters of many of the restaurants and local businesses up by the mall who indicated that for them, when there is a concert at the Myth, that it is an opportunity for people who would not normally come to the Maplewood Mall area to come to the Maplewood Mall area and spend extra money, whether or not if that is to eat before they go to the concert or eat after the concert or stay overnight at the local hotel that's up by the Maplewood Mall, or maybe even spend some time at the mall and go shopping. There was a letter from one mom who is, I believe, like from Wayzata, where she was saying that when they have concerts there for the teens and young adults who are underage for drinking, that when they have those concerts, that she typically has her daughters like to go to those concerts, and that they travel all the way from Wayzata, and so she drops them off at the concert, and then she stays there in and around the Maplewood Mall area waiting until the concert is done, so then she can pick them up afterwards. But during that time, she listed all the different things that she does when she's up near the mall, and something that she would not normally do if she wasn't there, but for bringing her daughters to this concert to have a good time. So you see, there is a lot of side benefits to having a destination at this location. It actually makes the Maplewood Mall area a destination location, which is one of the things that is lacking up at the Maplewood Mall. That they need to have more of a reason for people from not just the neighborhood to go to the mall area, but from the region to go to the mall area, because that is what's going to keep the mall alive. Now, we hear the Maplewood City Council and top administrators there at City Hall talk about their big plan that they are looking to have a hotel go in by Beam Avenue, that's on their big master plan. That's where they want a hotel to go in, because they say it'll be in conjunction with the fact that St. John's Hospital is there. Where in fact, the owners of the Myth, when they were before the City Council, they were telling the City Council that what really is going to drive a hotel deal to Maplewood, up by the Maplewood Mall, is having an entertainment destination location, not the hospital. And that there's this vacant property, which is the old Toys R Us building, which is not that far from where the Myth location is, probably about a block away, that would be an ideal location for a hotel. It's also right off of the freeway 694 and the intersection of 694 and White Bear Avenue. Perfect for a hotel. And yet the city poo-poos that, brushes it aside, and says that's not a good idea. Instead, they want to go with the old idea of the olden times, that you put a hotel by a hospital. Now, I'm going to tell you a couple of reasons that I know from my research why this idea of City Hall, that they think that it's ripe for development to have a hotel by the hospital. And as one of the city staff persons said last month at the Housing and Economic Development Commission in Maplewood, he said that the reason a hotel is going to go in sometime in the future by the hospital is to serve those people who are staying overnight because they've got friends or family who are staying overnight because of surgery or illness at the hospital. Now, what's wrong with that analysis? Here's a couple things. First of all, St. John's Hospital is a local hospital. It serves the local community. It's not a Mayo Clinic, it's not a Mayo Hospital, it's not a university hospital. It is not drawing people to that hospital from probably more than a half an hour's distance away. People from Edina are not going to St. John's Hospital. People who are in Forest Lake are not going to St. John's Hospital in Maplewood. They have their own big, brand new, shiny hospital up by Wyoming. They are not going to be coming to Maplewood. So you see, the city staff of Maplewood and the misguided council and appointed mayor are not looking at the data and statistics. Here's another thing to keep in mind, is that many hospitals, and this is the trend, not just only in local hospitals here in St. Paul and Maplewood and other, right around our metro area, but nationwide, hospitals are losing beds. And the reason they're losing beds and that they're cutting down on the number of beds they have is because they can't fill them. That is because many of the procedures that used to be done in the hospital, where people had to stay overnight, are no longer done that way. There's a new medical model out there for ambulatory surgery centers. And these are locations where you can go and you can get day surgery, you're released, and you're released to go home to recuperate. Now, these are the statistics of what's happening. Because we have an aging community and an aging society, many of the baby boomers, my age, a little bit younger and a little bit older, are now moving into that period of life where there's going to be more knee replacements, hip replacements, partial replacements, certain types of procedures for cardio procedures that are less invasive. There's an increase in use of robotics in surgery. All of these things have changed the model of providing medical care and the need to have people stay overnight. So if you're not having people stay overnight because of surgery or because of illness, you're not filling the beds, their family are not going to be staying in a hotel next to the hospital, especially when their own house is probably within 30 minutes away from the hospital. Why spend the dollars on a hotel room when you can just drive home, just a few miles away? So you see how misguided it is. But you see, in the next 5 to 7 years, and these are the statistics that are out there in the medical field, in the next 5 to 7 years, 40% of all of the knee replacement, hip replacements, and similar type surgeries are going to be done in these ambulatory surgery centers, not in hospitals. And the organization that monitors procedures for Medicare and Medicaid, they have taken hip replacements off of the overnight stay list. So you know that once these procedures are taken off of the list that permits overnight stays, there's not going to be any overnight stays. And yet the city council and the city staff of Maplewood are oblivious to these kinds of trends and these statistics when they make these broad plans and statements about a Maplewood Mall area, which they really don't know anything about when it comes to commercial real estate, to trends, and to what the real uses are. So getting back to this whole issue with the myth, the city of Maplewood's push to try to push the myth out of business is misguided, because that is not going to help the economy of Maplewood. What would help the economy of Maplewood is to ensure that you had a healthy entertainment center that was promoting and was doing good business in the community, because then that would bring in that extra hotel, that would bring in extra business and extra dollars for the other businesses that are in the Maplewood Mall. But now getting back to this complaint, it says here that although the myth participated in discussions with the chief of police and addressed all of his concerns and those of the Maplewood City Council, it never agreed to be bound by the proposed operational action plan or or by anything other than the existing legal requirements and conditions of its liquor license. So you see, the Myth already, of course, as a result of having a liquor license, they had rules and conditions on them in order to maintain that. But what the city of Maplewood was trying to do was to put an additional 34 additional conditions onto the Myth in order to maintain that license without actually a good standing legally in order to do that. And then it goes on to say that nonetheless, without due notice or a hearing, on June 10th, 2019, the city, through its city council, adopted that operational action plan. Remember, I mentioned there's like 34 things on the to-do list without change over the Myth's objection. And we showed that film footage where the Myth talked about each and every one of those various requirements, some of which are actually items that don't apply to the Myth, and yet they just threw them on to this list just to make the list look long and onerous. And there was no opportunity for the Myth to be fully heard. And as we showed on our news program, there was a point where representatives from the Myth wanted to get up and speak additionally to the council to address some of the comments that council members made that were quite derogatory. And they were told to sit down. We've heard enough from you. And council member Kathleen Juniman went so far to tell them that the next time you come before us, you can leave your attorneys at home. We don't want you here with your attorneys, but quite frankly, bringing your attorneys just makes things worse.
I think this conversation would have gone worlds better with the absence of attorneys. I may as well say it. They speak just fine for themselves. We can communicate with each other. I've never really liked attorneys a whole lot anyway, but this gets in the way. The inferences and things came from you. Let them speak. We're talking to each other now, and the chief's talking with them. That's what we want. To be blunt, stay away next time.
Pardon? Wow.
To be blunt, stay away next time. We can talk to these people. They know what.
Now, anybody knows that if you feel that you are losing a property right and you are having your business interfered with and that you've got the thumb of the government on your neck, you better have an attorney with you, and you better have a couple, 2, 3 of them, because that is what you're going to need. And yet, you've got a city council person who is telling them, leave your attorneys at home, you don't need them when you talk to us. Isn't that amazing? And yet I can tell you that she certainly has used legal counsel herself when she believes that her rights have been threatened or somehow violated, but she wants others to leave their attorney at home. And then it goes on to say that the operational action plan adopted by the city contains the following vague and ambiguous provision. Upon evidence of substantial non-compliance with the requirements outlined in the above operation action plan, the chief of police is authorized to order the closure of the business until the next available council meeting, at which time steps and or sanctions will be considered. There is a lot of ambiguity in that, and it is very prone to subjective, not objective, subjective interpretation, because now it is left up to one individual to decide which way the wind blows. And since it is the council and the senior staff at the city of Maplewood that's putting this edict out, do you think that they're going to support the chief of police version of which way the wind is blowing? Of course they are. That's the way it operates in Maplewood. Upon evidence of substantial non-compliance. What evidence? What level of evidence? What kind of non-compliance? How do you measure non-compliance? Good questions. That's why it's in the complaint. That's why they sued the city of Maplewood. So what the Myth is asking is that they are asking for declaratory relief, where they're asking the court for a judgment declaring that the operational action plan and the actions of the city in adopting this plan is unlawful, unconstitutional, and enforceable. Basically throwing it out the window and saying that they were taking actions that they had no authority to do and that they can't enforce their operational plan. The Myth is also asking for injunctive relief, that they claim that they are entitled to temporary and permanent injunctive relief prohibiting the city from implementing and enforcing the operational action plan, from closing or interfering with the Myth's business operations, from imposing unauthorized adverse conditions on Myth's liquor license, or from taking any other action against the Myth or its liquor license without due process of law. And guess what? If they ever find themselves at a due process hearing in front of the city council, they're entitled to bring their attorneys. The Myth is also alleging violations of United States 1983 action. And this is a abuse of police power action under the color of law. And they are saying that the actions of the city council, and its police department were performed under the color of law and therefore constitute actions of the state within the meaning of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. And that the actions of the city council, and the police department were and are arbitrary, capricious, unreasonable, unlawful, discriminatory, and in violation of due process and equal protection clauses of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States and Federal Statute 42 U.S.C. 1983. And as a matter of law and pursuant to statute, that the Myth is entitled to an award of its reasonable attorney's fees and costs incurred in connection with this action. You see, typically when you sue somebody, you have to foot the bill yourself for your own attorney's fees. But there are some particular cases that you can recover your attorney's fees if you are successful. And how you know whether or not you have a case that you can claim your attorney's fees to have them paid for you if you're successful is if it is a statute that authorizes that, or if you are suing under a contract and that contract provides that the prevailing party is entitled to their attorney's fees. So if it's under your contract and it says that, well then you can go for your attorney's fees to have them reimbursed to you if you prevail, or you have to look at the statute to see if it grants that to you. And you see, a 1983 case is one of those types of cases. And it's my opinion that it's set up that way as a deterrent for governmental entities not to act under the color of law. Because if they are found to act under the color of law, the person who had to go to court to defend their constitutional rights, they're entitled to their attorney's fees. And in these kinds of cases, these attorney's fees could be quite hefty depending upon the facts and the circumstances, that could be a very large attorney bill indeed. Now in Maplewood, let's say the Myth is the prevailing party. The city of Maplewood or their insurance carrier, the Minnesota League of Cities Trust Fund, will have to foot the bill. Now Maplewood, I think, does have a deductible. Last I knew it was like $50,000, so Maplewood would have to pay certainly their deductible, but in the end that really means it's the taxpayers that have to pay for the fact that the city of Maplewood, the upper echelon staff, the city manager, and the city council is trampling on the rights and the 14th Amendment constitutional rights of the Myth. Oh, lucky us, for those of us who live in Maplewood. And so therefore, that is what this complaint entails. And as I indicated, the city of Maplewood filed their answer, and their answer says, deny, deny, deny. Well, we'll keep you posted as more of this case moves forward. Typically, from what my understanding is of these types of cases, especially since the Myth is asking for declaratory judgment, is that they might bring a motion for declaratory judgment or a summary judgment motion so that it doesn't necessarily go to trial. However, it's hard to know at this point until we see those papers filed and the court date is set. So we'll keep you posted. There might also be some discovery involved in this case. Certainly the attorneys for the Myth could do discovery of the city and ask for information, even like what emails have the city council exchanged with the city manager regarding the Myth. They could ask for that information for, like, say, maybe potentially for the last 3 years to find out what has been the sentiment, the conversations of the city council with their city manager, and is there a demonstrated pattern and intent to move the Myth out of Maplewood and squeeze them out of business. They could do that. They could do that kind of discovery to find out if there's that kind of information out there. Well, like I say, we'll have to keep you posted and see what else comes from that. Now, the next thing that I want to cover is on another topic. And certainly here we are in a public access studio in St. Paul, providing our newscast, a cable cast. This program, Off the Record News, has been on public access cable cast waves for over 16 years, pretty much every single week. And so we are very interested in what is happening with cable channels and cable studios such as this, and what are some of the rules and regulations that are being developed that unfortunately are putting a squeeze on public access studios. Recently, the FCC, and that is the Federal Communications Commission, they provide regulations and rulings and opinions on all things cable related and franchise fee cable related. And they issued what's called the 621 order. And that 621 order was released on August 2nd, 2019. And this new order will take effect 30 days after the publication in the Federal Registry. And so by now, because this is the beginning of November, it would be taking effect more than likely right about now or shortly after this program. Now, this particular order, this 621 order, is what they call is a prospective order in its application. And so it doesn't affect retroactively any of the contracts between Comcast or other cable companies and the various public access studios or the commissions that are in place. But it's prospective. It goes into the future, so that if, for instance, you have a cable franchise and a commission, and you have a public access studio, such as what we have here, that is has a current contract, this order won't affect you yet. But particularly for those areas, those communities that are without a contract, or that are negotiating a contract, or will soon be negotiating a contract, this is something that will impact them. And it says that while the FCC concluded that the costs associated with the provision of the PEG channel capacity are to be considered costs that can be offset from franchise fees, the FCC found the record to be insufficient to determine what those costs should be. And so let's back up from that a little bit, in that when you subscribe to cable, to Comcast, and you are getting their cable channels, not just the internet, but the cable channels, there is a fee that you pay that's a PEG fee. That's part of the fees and the taxes that come along with your invoice. Those PEG fees, PEG stands for public access, education, and government. And so that PEG fee, that is what pays for you to be able to watch your local city hall's meetings on your cable channels. That's what allows you to watch your school board meetings. That's the government channel. Then you've got the public access channel, which here we are on channel 15. This is one of the channels, and that part of the fee that's for the PEG fees is what helps to supply the overhead for the studio, the equipment, so that members of the community can communicate with the people of their community about local issues, which is exactly what our programming has done for over 16 years. Talk about local issues, talk about local news, have on guests who are talking about issues and events and organizations and initiatives that are important to them, that the mainstream media, the commercial media, don't pay any never mind about. It's the people's TV. That's what it is. And that's what part of your PEG fees pays for. Unless, of course, you live in communities like Maplewood, where the City Council of Maplewood decided to pull out of the Joint Powers Agreement for the Commission and said, well, we're going to take all those PEG fees and we're going to put it into our operational budget to fund City Hall instead. So basically, they're ripping off the public who is paying these PEG fees to Comcast, because they're not getting their PEG channels. And of course, typically, if you are a full service, public access, and governmental channel and community channel area, there's also channels that serve the religious community as well, so that way church services or other types of programming having to do with other types of religion, or even the atheists have their own program that they have on there, so that anything having to do with that is on that channel, and you can, you know, be aware of what other people are thinking about and participate in watching those programs also. So you see, that gives you an idea about what these PEG fees are. So you see, what this order then is getting down to is that they're saying that Comcast has to pay all these franchise fees to these cities for right-of-way, for being able to use the, you know, the cable right-of-way in their city, and these franchise fees. And so this order is saying that the fees that are collected through the PEG fees, that they can be offset, that they can go towards helping Comcast pay their franchise fees to the city. Now, this is a double-edged sword. Now, in the case of Maplewood, I say, yahoo! This is great. Maplewood shouldn't be collecting PEG fees from all of the Comcast subscribers out there, using it for city government purposes, and then collecting all the franchise fees from Comcast as well. Because Maplewood's not providing any of the public community access programming needs of the community whatsoever. They have one channel. They show their city council meetings, and some of their commission meetings, and now they're saying they don't have enough money to show the Historic Preservation Commission meetings anymore, because it just costs too much money to have somebody monitor the camera once a month for 2 hours. So they're going to take them off the cable channels. And yet they collect $500,000 a year in PEG fees from Comcast subscribers who live in Maplewood. So you see, this particular order, it's going to impact Maplewood. They're not going to be necessarily able, of course they have a contract now for the next few years, but once that contract is up, they may not necessarily be, if this order holds up, they may not necessarily be able to collect both money from all the Comcast subscribers in Maplewood, as well as all the franchise fees from Comcast, and say, woohoo, we're the big winner now, and we can use this all to run our city hall, when none of it has anything to do with cable casting, community television, or the purpose for which all of this was started. So there you go. Well, we'll follow some more on this as it evolves, because there are going to be more reports on the ramifications of this order, but at least it's important for you to know that it's out there, and that depending upon what community you live in, it may have different impacts on you than it does to another community, depending upon where your particular community is in their contract negotiations with Comcast, or whether or not your local city hall has taken over the franchise fees and the negotiation, and has now starting to collect all the fees anyway, not providing any services to the community. So you see, it's going to be different for every community in the ultimate impact on the people of that community. And so this program, while we do our newscasting and our programming here in St. Paul, it also is shown in the communities served by the public access studios in Stillwater and Inver Grove Heights and their studios, and also a number of other studios as well. Plus, we are also on YouTube. And you'll notice at the beginning and the end of our programming, we have an introduction screen that tells you how to find our newscasts on YouTube. And it specifically tells you how to go to Google, the search that you need to put into Google to find our programming on YouTube. So oftentimes you hear people say, well, public access programming is old-fashioned, there's no need for it any longer, and because you can just be on YouTube, except that here's the deal, is that public access is local to your community, and people can find you because you're local in their community on Channel 15. It's not a hard thing to find. On YouTube, you are competing with the entire world of programming. There are so many programs on YouTube. How would you ever find those programs that specifically relate to your local community? And so you see, that's the challenge of trying to have your newscasts on YouTube, because how can anybody find you? So that's why we have specifically put on our screens the exact search that you need to put into Google so you can find our 3 newscasts that we do weekly, and you can find them on YouTube. And once you find them, then you want to subscribe, because then when you subscribe, when a new newscast comes up, you will be notified, so then you can just simply go to watch it as if it's been bookmarked for you, and so you don't have to do that search over and over again every single week. So that should make it a lot easier to find us in the whole wide world of news out there. So I hope you find that helpful. Now, I think we have a little bit time left. Do we have a little time left? Okay. So what we are going to do in the last portion of our program, I went back into our archives and I found some film footage that I found interesting, in that so often we talk about what's currently going on, and then we don't go back to what was said even just like short 2 years ago and analyze what they said back then and what has happened and transpired since then, and doing the analysis now a couple years later as to what was said then. So these clips that we're going to work on next, we've had on our programs years ago. But we're going to look at them with a fresh eye, because I think we're going to find them very interesting. So let's take a look at our first clip.
So that brings us to new business. So we're happy to have Rita here with us. We've heard her a couple of times now at the Business Engagement Breakfast and at the Maplewood Business Council. I think Mr. Kaneko is going to do the introduction. So that brings us to new business. So we're happy to have Rita here with us. We've heard her a couple of times now at the Business Engagement Breakfast and at the Maplewood Business Council. I think Mr. Kaneko is going to do the introduction.
Now, we couldn't help but play that clip, because first of all, that is Nora Slawick, who back in 2017 was the mayor of Maplewood. She was a placeholder. And we have shown film footage from a few years before that, where it was actually acknowledged on another program that the only reason that she ran for the position of mayor of Maplewood was to keep somebody else from winning, and that she was just basically a placeholder until her cronies could find somebody better. Well, in the meantime, since 2017, so that's not that long ago, since then, she was appointed to be the chair of the Metropolitan Council. Perhaps maybe just another placeholder. I'm not certain, because you see, just this week, it was announced that she's now resigned as the chair of the Metropolitan Council. She's only been there 10 months, and she's resigned already. Oh my goodness. So here she is, a placeholder as mayor of Maplewood until her cronies can find somebody better. She gets placed and appointed to be the chair of the Metropolitan Council, and now she's stepped down and resigned. So let's see who's going to take her place. But here she is at the Maplewood City Council meeting, mentioning that now they're going to be talking about the 2040 Comprehensive Plan, which back in 2017, the city of Maplewood had to put together so that they could approve their 2040 comp plan and submit it to the Metropolitan Council for approval. So let's continue with our next clip.
Mayor stated Rita Trapp is here from HGKI, and she's going to give you an update on where we are with the comprehensive plan. And obviously, Council, this is an opportunity for you to ask questions of us, staff, and our consultant as well. We want to make sure that if you have questions, concerns, areas that we may have not covered quite yet or want some clarity, please ask. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rita Trapp.
All right, thank you. Really the focus today is to update where we are in the 2040 comprehensive planning process. And as Dewey said, our intent is really to provide you an overview of where we're at and solicit input and any directions, any thoughts, things that we should be keeping in mind. We are actually in the process of starting to work on drafting chapters, and so it's helpful at this stage to have any thoughts that you have on where we should be headed with the comprehensive plan. Just a little bit of brief overview. On the screen is the project, I keep doing mine but not yours. Project schedule. As you can see, this is a long process, about an 18-month process. We are where the yellow highlighted in is in October. We've gone through a number of tasks, things including outreach to the community, exploring different possibilities with the steering committee and the different boards and commissions. And so we're now here before you to kind of provide you an update of where we are at and solicit some input. Our next task is to actually update the plan elements, as I said, and start sharing those with the steering committee, with the planning commission, and again with you come January. As I noted, there is a steering committee, and that steering committee is made up of a variety of representatives from local business, the healthcare community, the faith community, residents, Ramsey County, the YMCA, and representatives of all the boards and commission. This group is really charged with providing kind of a continuity amongst all of the chapters of the comprehensive plan, providing that input to us so that we can make sure that we're covering all of the topics that are important to the community. They are one of the many groups that are actively involved with the process. It's also important to recognize that we've had significant involvement from the boards and commissions. That's one aspect here in Maplewood that I don't always see in all the communities I work with. The Parks and Recreation Commission, Environmental and Natural Resources Commission, Heritage Preservation Commission, Housing and Economic Development Commission, the Community Design Review Board, and the Planning Commission have all been integrally involved in this process. They have actually they're in the process this month of reviewing initial draft thoughts on goals and policies and their chapter contents for those chapters that are relevant to those groups. So that's one thing to be commended about, is just the number of individuals that are involved in this comprehensive planning process.
Did you notice? We've got, Nora Slawick doing an introduction of the person who's going to do the introduction. And then we got Dwayne Dewey Canicchio, a senior staff person, doing an introduction of the person who's actually going to do the work of the presentation. So we got a couple different people having to do the introduction of the introduction of the introduction. Now, that was 2017. Since then, Dwayne Dewey Canicchio is no longer at City Hall. From our sources, he's been fired. And that was already a year ago or so. So now we have in this clip less than 2 years have gone by. Nora Slawick evaporated from the picture. Dwayne Dewey Canicchio evaporated from the picture. But they're talking about the steering committee that worked on the comprehensive plan for Maplewood. Now, if you were to just listen to this presentation, it sounds like there was really a lot going on at this steering committee level and at the meetings. But if you've been watching our programming, our newscasts over the last few years, you were able to watch the film footage of those steering committee meetings, not because the city of Maplewood cable cast them so everybody in the community could see what was being discussed, but because our production team was there in the field getting the film footage. And it was at those meetings that we discovered that the density of the Gladstone neighborhood in Maplewood was changed from 26 units per acre to 50 units per acre in that area, in and around that intersection of Frost and English. Now, we've had a lot of news programs on that, so if you're interested in knowing more about that particular issue about the Gladstone community, the change in the density, the housing, the rush line, and all of that, please look at our past news programs in our archives on YouTube, and you will find a wealth of information that you will hear only from these news programs. Now, she also gave a list of all the various commissions that apparently weighed in and worked on the 2040 Comprehensive Plan. And while, yes, they did indeed talk a little bit about the 2040 Comprehensive Plan, it was in the context of that when they had their meeting, the city staff person would give them a presentation and say, well, this is what's being worked on, this is what the staff is looking at changing, what do you think? And then basically would just get a rubber stamp from them, and that would be the be-all, end of all of it, and that would be their engagement. It's not a true engagement whatsoever. Let's take a look at our next clip.
I also want to talk a little bit about the community engagement that we've done to date. The intent right now is to wrap up our first phase of community engagement where we're trying to identify what's important to the community, and that will be ending at the end of this month. So looking at events and meetings, we've done a variety of different outreach. We've actually gone to community events to spread the word about what we're doing. So we've been to the June movie night, the July 4th event, a WOW event in July, visited with the Rotary, had 2 meetings with the Business Council, did the business engagement breakfast just a couple weeks ago, and then we met with 2 faith community elder groups to try and get their perspective as well. One of the biggest areas of input has been through Social Pinpoint, which is a web-based interface. And as you can see from the graph, we've had over 700 users of that website. On average, folks are spending about 18 minutes exploring all of the comments. Hopefully you're familiar and you've been out to the site and have seen it. It's really an opportunity for individuals to provide geographic-based input. They can zoom into their specific neighborhood and provide us input on their concerns. And as you can see with the pie chart, about 22% of the comments are related to like it. About 34% are needs work, are areas that we need to be thinking about as we move forward in the comprehensive plan process. And then there's about 24% that are safety concerns.
Well, the sliver for the green, that they like it, was only about 1/4 of the people who were responding. Now, there was one bright light in this whole process. There was one neighborhood that was able to save their neighborhood. We'll cover that again next time. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.